Thank you everyone for joining us today. So this training is crafting visuals to communicate your science. I'm Lauren LaPuma. I work in the CIRES Communications office. I'm the NOAA-based CIRES communicator and also the acting communications director. And our other speakers today are Demetria Trash from GSL, from NOAA's Global Systems Lab, Kathy Bogan, who's from the CIRES Communications office, and Chelsea Thompson from NOAA's Chemical Sciences Lab. And apologies, my dog is making noise if you hear that. She's being a little needy today. So I will let all of our speakers introduce themselves when it gets to their section, but thank you all for joining us, and we are excited to share this training with you. And just so you all know, we are recording this training and we will post the slides and the recording on our CIRES Communications page, which is shown right down here at the bottom of this slide. And I'll try to email them all the slides to you all as well so that you have a copy. So there's no need to take notes unless you really, really want to. So just to start off, why are we doing this training right now? We are doing this as part of the CIRES strategic plan. One of the things we want to implement as part of our plan is a science illustration contest. So this contest is going to challenge our CIRES researchers to create visualizations of their science or a scientific concept for a non-science audience. And so as part of that, we are opening up trainings to CIRES, to NOAA, to all their cooperative institutes, to CU Boulder, to help scientists gain the skills that will really help them be better visual communicators. So this training is focused on graphic design. We did one on video and animation back in November, and then we'll do one on data visualization at the end of this month on March 26th. So our contest is going to open in a couple of weeks and then run through April, and more info will be sent out to all of you via email, so look for that. But we hope, regardless of whether you want to submit something to the contest or not, we hope that these skills will help all of you in your science communication efforts. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to start off with why good design matters in science. Then we're going to kick it over to Dimitri, who's going to talk about user experience and user interface design. Then Chelsea will take over and give you all some foundations of graphic design and basic principles that are used in the field. And then Kathy's going to talk about more logistics and day-to-day and really kind of the tools that will help you in designing and processes and ideas and things like that. And then at the end, if we have time, we're going to do an activity where we will review some existing graphic designs, and you will all will have a chance to give feedback on them. And then we'll do some Q&A. But if anyone has questions, feel free to pop them in the chat at any time and we'll address them, or you can wait till the end. So I'll start with why good design matters in science. And again, I'm Lauren LaPuma, so I work in the CIRES Communications office, and my background originally was science. My degree is engineering, but then I switched over to doing science communication about 12 years ago. And I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I do writing, editing, graphic design, photography, video. I've done some podcasting in my past as well. So I kind of do all of the different types of communication things. But visual communication has kind of become my favorite over the past few years, and I really enjoy doing it. So I'll start off just giving you guys kind of a quick overview, kind of whet your appetite, and then I'll kick it off to our other speakers who will really go into the details. So why do we care about design at all? Well, especially in science, what good design will do is it will draw in your audience and really kind of maximize the time that they spend looking at your design or your product. And that's kind of really what we want to do, is we want to spark curiosity, interest in the topic. We really want your audience to be interested in what you're talking about. So good design will really help that. It can also really help enhance understanding of the topic area for those who are not experts. And so there's actually been some research on this. So here is an example of a paper that was published a few years ago, where these researchers looked at how the value of visual design, or how visual design was valuable in scientific communication. So what they did here was they looked at some research papers that had a graphical abstract, so an abstract presented in a graphical way that kind of summed up the main finding or topic of the paper. And they took the original graphical abstract and then they kind of applied visual design principles to it to improve it and make it better. And so here's one example. Here's the original graphical abstract, which they thought was a little too cluttered. And the diagram of what the actual molecular process was too small to be legible or understood by the audience. And so what they're looking at here is actually some silicone nanowires and some particles and showing chemical reactions that happen on the surface of these wires. So what they did in the bottom figure is they redid the graphical abstract using design principles. They used an electron microscope image of the wires, and then they pulled out and really kind of zoomed into the actual process so you could see it much more clearly what was happening on a atomic scale. And so you see much more clearly the reactions that are taking place there. So they did this for a whole bunch of abstracts, and then they surveyed folks as to what they thought of the paper before and after. And they found that by improving and redesigning the graphical abstract, the readers had a better sense of what the paper was about. They thought the title and figure made sense together. They thought that the paper was written more clearly and seemed more interesting. So they pretty much had a better impression of the paper and the authors after the design principles were applied. So it just goes to show that really good design can help enhance understanding. It can help the readers be or the viewers be more interested in the science and have a better opinion of the authors themselves. So it's really, kind of going again, helping you to express your ideas clearly, succinctly, quickly. And so that's really important because human beings, we process visual information much more quickly than through other means. And good design also helps to kind of minimize the amount of brain power that your reader or your viewer will need to understand what's going on, the science or the concept. And Dimitri will talk a little bit about this as well. So it just makes the information more accessible and makes it easier to understand and digest. Good design will also give you more control over what your audience remembers by, highlighting certain elements and changing size and spacing and things like that. It helps you control what your audience sees, remembers, and then the flow of information and how they process information throughout the graphic. And Chelsea will talk a little bit more about this in terms of visual storytelling. And again, it will help build trust in you and your research results. So, our speakers will talk a little bit about more of this, but I just want to give you kind of an overview. Before you get started designing a graphic or whatever it may be, just really think about who's your audience, what their perspective is, and what they care about, and tailor your design to them and their needs. And then think about, what do you want them to remember? What do you want them to take away from your design? Are you trying to educate? Are you trying to entertain? What are really kind of simplify, what are the few pieces, maybe 1 to 3 pieces of information that you want to communicate most, and highlight those in your design and in your storytelling. And again, yeah, what story are you trying to tell? Really kind of build in a narrative structure to your design if you can. And then how can you simplify the concept as much as possible so that the audience has fewer pieces of information to digest, which makes it easier for them to understand. And before we move on, I'm just going to show you guys a few examples of graphics that I think kind of exemplify these concepts really well. So here's a graphic that NOAA created last year as part of the State of the Climate report that they put out every year. So what I want to point out here is at the very top, you have a title that really sums up the main points that they want the viewers to take away, is that all 3 dominant greenhouse gases hit record highs in 2023. And so here they split it out by those 3 gases, and they show a graph of the changes in these gases over time from 1980 to 2020. But then at the very bottom, they give you a summary of how much higher they were than pre-industrial levels. So the audience doesn't have to spend time looking at this graph and trying to figure out how much higher it was or why the results are significant. They're showing it to you right there. Here's a graphic that I actually helped work on in my career. And so This was a story that I had written about the Haranis Abyss, which is the deepest freshwater cave, and it's located in the Czech Republic. And so what we wanted to do here was just give a sense of scale to show just how deep this cave is. So we compared it to various well-known buildings throughout the built environment. So the Eiffel Tower, the Empire State Building, the Burj Khalifa, which at the time was the tallest building in the world. I'm not sure if it still is. So we just show this visually how deep this cave is compared to these other buildings to give a sense of scale. And so that was really important because that was what we wanted to get across is that this cave is so, so deep. It's deeper than anything we've built as human beings. And then here finally is a visualization from Science Magazine from a few years ago based on some research that looked at the shape of birds' eggs and why that's important. So not all birds' eggs are the same shape. They actually vary in how symmetrical they are and how round versus elliptical they are. And so what they did here was they started off with this just kind of scatter plot of the various bird egg shapes based on the species, and they kind of plotted them based on asymmetry, so how spherical versus not spherical they were, and then how elliptical they were, so round versus elliptical. And so not only there's a couple things I want to point out here. So they started with this basic scatter plot, which is the raw data of each bird species eggs. And then, but along each axis, they show you what they mean by spherical versus not spherical, symmetric versus not symmetric. So you can see clearly what an egg of that shape would look like. Then they go in and add examples of real birds' eggs, and especially ones that kind of exemplify the extremes of this. So you can see down here, the hawk owl has a really almost completely spherical egg. And then you go up here to the maleo. This is a really elliptical egg, but it's very symmetrical. All the way over here to the murre and the sandpiper, which are really conical and asymmetrical. And so it's interesting that these birds they lay eggs on rocky cliffs, and so they think the conical shape helps the eggs not roll away and fall off the cliff when they're laid. So just a really good example of visual communication here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dimitri.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk to you all about one of my favorite subjects here, um, user experience and user interface design and how that kind of folds into graphic design. So, my goal throughout this presentation here is to just show you how these fields, UX and UI design, help support scientists, forecasters, and the stakeholders that we have and we outreach, to include the community at large. So, many people think of design in purely visual terms, but UX UI design focuses on how individuals interact with the data, the tools that they're using, software applications, and even things out in the real world too. And um, like Lauren said, by placing audience needs at the center here of what we're designing and what we're building and what we're trying to communicate, we can really shape our communication, software, or websites to pass that message along more clearly, reduce confusion, and really highlight core messages. And this is especially important at the work we do at NOAA because NOAA handles a diverse set of weather and climate data, and it really needs to be accurately communicated and accessible for everybody. So we'll talk a little bit about what UI UX is, why it matters, and explore some different things. So, next slide. So, a quick little piece about me. I'm a lead UI UX designer over at the Global Systems Lab with CIRA. I've been with CIRA for just over 2 years. I've been doing design, web design, user experience design over a decade now. So a ton of experience with software and doing translating graphics into digital interfaces. So I work with the IDSS engine team over at GSL, as well as a few other initiatives out there, really focusing on user-centered visualizations that we have to help better communicate some of the risks that weather can pose and how to help the forecasters doing work with that information communicate that out more clearly. So a big heavy focus on taking complex data, people that are way smarter than me work with, and translating that into things that, the average person can understand and digest and action off of. So I'm really passionate about this. I really love taking visuals and being able to kind of morph it so we can communicate it clearly and really understand how people understand information and interact with it. So um next slide, please. So just a quick overview. I want to give you a timeline of what I'm going to talk about here. So first, I'm going to break down what UX and UI actually mean and how these concepts kind of extend beyond just aesthetics and that visual aspect of it. And then we'll talk about why that's so important to NOAA. From scientists to developers to the communities that we serve, it's really important to take these ideas to heart so we can take that amazing information that we work with and communicate it out to the people who need it most. After that, we'll talk about a few core UX UI principles and including usability, clarity, consistency, easy navigation, all which help address user needs in software. And then we'll talk about a few examples from NOAA's existing platforms. I'm sure you're familiar with one or several of these, like weather pages, other data tools, and um, then we'll take a look at what the future holds, right? So part of what I do on my team is we're working on advancing the next generation of software, making it easier for folks to interact with, better data, better visualization, so people can understand it more quickly and make those decisions in a timely manner to help um, save property and lives. So we'll kind of talk about how applying strong design ideas can improve the way this complex data is communicated. Next slide, please. So let's start with a few definitions here. This gets muddy because everybody's got a different definition for UX, UI, whatever. But for the scope of this talk, this is kind of how we'll refer to it. So user experience, or UX, um, refers to the overall journey or touch points a person takes when using a product, a software, or a service. Um, it looks at like how easily users move through a process, and whether that's retrieving data or interpreting charts or navigating a website. UX also covers that emotional response too. Do users feel confident? Do they feel lost? Are they satisfied? Are they frustrated? Elements like labeling, feedback mechanisms, and navigation flows all play a role in shaping how that experience plays out for folks. User interface, or UI design, is more about those direct visuals, right? You think of a website, you think about screens, buttons, icons, text fields, all the things that you interact with on a daily basis. And UI design kind of focuses on picking those suitable colors, fonts, layouts that look appealing, but also support that user experience and the user goals in the end. And it's possible to have a very polished UI, but a poor user experience. And that can lead to a lot of problems, but overall a confusing process and ultimately a breakdown in communication of what you're trying to send as a communication center and what the receiver is trying to understand. So if user interfaces are hard to read or unclear, um, you know, forecasters, scientists, the public may struggle to grasp those key insights that you're trying to tell in that story through weather apps or climate dashboard or other tools. So a strong solution really addresses the UX on a broader level and the UI on a more detailed level. Next slide, please. So at NOAA, we work with an enormous range of data, from atmospheric to oceanic to satellite-based readings, just a ton of stuff that amazing people are doing amazing things with. And these data sets are not only large, but can be, extremely complex too, requiring specialists to interpret them correctly. And at the same time, too, the general public really depends on accurate forecasts, accurate understandings, and clear updates about what that data holds within it, especially during extreme events like, extreme weather conditions, etc. So that means the tools and applications that we put out there really need to be straightforward and really dependable for folks. So with UX and UI design, uh, scientists, developers can present this information so that different users, regardless of their background, can find what they need without confusion. A well-structured layout, consistent icons, clear labeling, all helps people understand the meaning behind, complex charts or complex visualizations. Effective user experience also reduces training time too. If an interface is intuitive, users can learn to navigate more quickly, which makes collaboration smoother across, research teams and from that center to receiver relationship. And when public or when the public or policymakers visit these resources that we're providing them, they can grasp the findings without, that unnecessary friction that often comes with some of our data heavy products, which really helps improve, you know, the overall experience for everybody and goes back to NOAA's mission of informing and protecting communities. Next slide. So a little bit about social science and software design. So user experience design doesn't just involve, coding, visual appeal. It's very heavy in social science, and it intersects a lot with psychology, and how the brain works and how it interacts with the world around it. So UX designers and researchers often gather data about user habits, motivations, which helps, guide the decisions that we design to. For instance, I might conduct user interviews or surveys to figure out how forecasters prefer to see data arranged on a map, or how local emergency managers want to navigate an app. And these insights drive layout choices like um, data placement, labeling, and types of interactions that we want to include. And we talk a little bit about inclusion too, and we mean that we're acknowledging Noah's audience comes from a very diverse background, right? Like ultimately, our our data will end up in the laps of the general public. So some folks might be highly technical experts, others might just be curious learners, others could be local officials who need quick updates. And it's really essential to offer interfaces that, acknowledge those differences and accommodate different levels of knowledge, um, technological proficiency, and context. And then accessibility matters too, right? So color contrast, keyboard friendly navigation, properly labeled charts assist people with different abilities across a broad spectrum. So good social science practices ensure that tools aren't just built on assumptions, but real user needs. And by including real diverse user perspectives from the start, designers, developers can avoid that guesswork and produce software that people can engage with more easily, and it's built with them at the center of it rather than um, just off in a silo somewhere. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a few key pillars here of UX UI design that directly impact Noah's work. The first is usability and how easily it is for someone to accomplish their goals that they set out to do. So whether you think about it or not, everybody who goes to a website, regardless of the website, they're there for a specific reason. Even if it's just to like browse and kill time in their brain, everybody has a specific goal or a specific job that they're there to do, and um, that might mean, putting out a clear set of filters on a data page, or a more intuitive way to compare forecast models. Simple controls, descriptive text, and straightforward error messages all make that task of navigating smoother so they can accomplish their goals or that user journey that they came to complete. Next, we have clarity and consistency, which really does matter across interfaces. So when users see uniform color schemes and text styling, they can more quickly recognize key elements. Conventions are conventions for a reason too. It's not by accident that a lot of websites are kind of built the same. Familiarity kind of helps speed the process up. So if I know what a mobile menu looks like on one website, I have a pretty good idea of what it's going to do when I click on it on this new website I'm on. So um, I if a button or a link behaves the same way on each screen, from different websites within a suite of tools. Users develop that a trust in that tool and that familiarity, so they can use it quicker. Feedback's also crucial too, right? So letting people know when data is loading, what they're doing, having that communication between the user and the system helps build that trust, helps kind of blend that human machine element so they can get their work done and they know things are happening and working for them. Finally, navigation is about kind of is that logical structure that guides folks from one step to the next, right? If we have a specific task to accomplish, it might exist in multiple parts from getting from A to B to C. So if that route between vital features or jobs is confusing, user satisfaction drops, frustration grows, and they can abandon a tool or misinterpret the data. So we really work as designers to address those hurdles and make sure it's a pleasant, straightforward experience as users navigate their tasks that they're trying to do. Next slide. So how do we reduce some of that confusion? One of the main goals in UX and UI design is to prevent that, right? That starts with labeling. Buttons like run model or check forecast are far more descriptive than generic terms like submit. When working with icons, it should be intuitive so people can kind of guess that purpose without hovering for a tooltip, using that to enhance the UI and enhance their experience so they can find that they can make those associations more quickly. And then if there's any uncertainty, adding, a small text or a label to reduce that guesswork really goes a long, long way, for, user satisfaction, feeling trust in the system, and just being able to get from A to B to C more quickly. Well-placed tooltips or pop-up hints on a software for new users or occasional users help them learn the system without having to dig through a long user manual or excessive documentation. For example, a short line of text explaining what a radar reflectivity, graph means could prevent some of those misunderstandings. And visual aids like charts or heat maps should follow consistent rules too, right? Um, if red represents a higher intensity in one graph, keep that consistent across other displays. If that scale changes, it's important to make it obvious and spell it out. And these small design choices really ensure that um, we can make those timely, accurate, and quick interpretations of data that we're trying to present. Next. So I want to talk through some examples of NOAA, and I want to preface this by saying NOAA is a government agency, and I feel like that comes with like certain connotations. Amazing work that we're doing. But a lot of the websites that are out there are very utilitarian, right? They're very tailored to a specific use case. They're not put there's not a lot of razzle dazzle with it. They're not pretty by any means, which makes it hard to navigate a lot of it. So just wanted to show some of these. So like I said, these platforms deliver some amazing real-time data, observations. We can see warnings on them. Um, but it's really built around a lot of the stuff is built around specific user groups like trained meteorologists or emergency managers. And um, you can see pretty quickly that it feels like the general audience gets a little bit overlooked, right? Like it's it's not an everyday person who's going to look at a radar loop and be able to tell what's going on other than like red is bad and green is good. So if these aren't well structured, like the average person can't understand, completely what's going on or might miss some of those important details. Some features work very well, like, some of the charts that are out there, some alerting, but there's definitely opportunities across NOAA's website portfolio to refine some of the user experience pieces, reduce some of that complexity, make navigation a little bit easier for newcomers, and tell that story better about the weather that's happening around them. And that's where UI and UX comes into play by applying this thoughtful approach. NOAA can help maintain the same scientific rigor while speaking to a wider community of folks, um, of people who want to be engaged with the weather, whether it's the general public, policymakers, decision support managers, forecasters, etc. So if you scroll to the next slide, I just want to showcase a few of these poorly designed websites, right? I think this is weather.gov, a pretty basic website that NOAA fields. Um, and it's like I said, it's very utilitarian, right? Like we see a map, we kind of get these colors. The colors aren't amazingly obvious, right? There's purple, pink, shades of tan. You have to kind of click on things to figure out what is going on there. So um, it's definitely not pretty by any 2025 standards, but it kind of does the job. But like I was saying, it really speaks to a niche audience. Like I would expect a forecaster to use this, but it being at weather.gov, you could see how a normal person wanting to know what the weather would hit this webpage for an official source of weather and have no idea what to do, what to click on, or what this map means. Um, Next page. This is one of my favorites. I was a former pilot. I was in the Navy for 12 years and use this website aviationweather.gov for oh gosh, almost every day of my life for those 12 years. So I know it very intimately well. And this actually just got a redesign and it's not great. Like there are other tools out there that are very fine tuned to how pilots go through the weather briefing process, what they want to see, what they want to do. Not to say that this information isn't valuable, but on the previous incarnation of this, it took a little finding. You had to know what you were doing to like get weather data, and I feel like this is kind of the same approach, but just with a little bit different skin on it. So, it the point being, there's still a lot of room for thinking about who our audience is, like pilots in this case, how they would want to interact with those briefings, and how to kind of guide them through that journey. I, as a pilot, showed up to this website to get a weather briefing to plan for my flight, and I know I need to look at A to B to C. And starting there, I can tailor that website to make it a lot more user friendly and help, the user at the other end of the screen finish that job. Next. And lastly, here's just another cut of a national radar mosaic. So again, lots of colors. Who knows what's going on? I've got a little legend at the bottom, but for just the average citizen, it's not very intuitive at all. Like there's a lot going on. I don't know what's good and bad. And it's just not very user friendly. So um, there's, like I said, a lot of amazing data, a lot of good stuff, but thinking about who's using it, who could be using it, really opens the doors of like, how should we design this? How should we think about how should we model it? So next slide. That kind of segues into a lot of the work that we're doing. So if you right click on that video, Lauren, and just hit loop, it'll loop while I'm talking. There you go. Perfect. Thank you. Um, so we're at GSL kind of working to develop those next generation of tools um, through various different projects and really putting human-centered design at the focus of it. So I work for the IDSS engine team, which we pour a lot of energy into doing user outreach and human-centered design. In this next generation tool, we use advanced data mining algorithms and model data to assist forecasters and decision makers to understand better what's going on with weather conditions in a really accessible and intuitive way. Our approach on the IDSS engine team has really been about being clear and deliberate about how we're presenting a lot of this data. We have dashboards that are built for quick and easy interpretation across a wide set of users to show information that's relevant to the folks at that time to help them finish the job that they came to do. And from this project's inception, we have really been focused on our users, accessibility, and being, as inclusive as we can about our user base and who's going to be using it, whether it's forecasters, local managers, or even if we extend this to the general public at some point. We really want to make it accessible to just about everybody. Another product that's in development is DESI, which is the dynamic ensemble-based scenarios for IDSS. Gotta love acronyms within acronyms, but DESI lets users explore really large data sets and interact with really complex visualizations and share findings. It's an amazing tool, and because of how powerful it is and how it's been built by forecasters for forecasters, DESI has really received a ton of widespread praise and quick adoptions within the test offices that it's been sent to and weather communities. And kind of the next thing on the horizon is another project that we're connected to, NWS Connect, which is planned as a next generation suite of weather applications that'll help give weather offices a unified end-to-end way to view, share, and communicate weather updates with core partners. So all these products provide some great opportunities for applying these UI UX methods. From consistent color palettes, icons, clearly deliberately planned navigation paths. You can see how like strong design really ensures that some of the complex data that gets presented can be presented in a very digestible manner if we just put a little bit more effort and thought into it, which goes to boost outreach for the folks that we serve and the people that are really going to benefit from this. Next slide, please. So when UX UI is done right, scientists spend a lot less time thinking about how to read a chart and more time thinking about discussing findings or making decisions. And this efficiency can be really vital during urgent situations. And reducing that complexity also encourages collaboration too. If an interface is consistent, teams, people, a number of different folks can join efforts without worrying about steep learning curves. A well-designed system also fosters that trust. When the public has confidence in NOAA's websites, they look professional. They work. I know what to do with them. They're more likely to heed warnings and understand them and trust that data, and come back. When they have a question, and that extends to other products that we put out there too. Whether it's scientists or folks to the scientists to the general public, but um, the end result is a stronger community, stronger engagement, and a easier way for applying the data we have in meaningful ways that really benefit folks, whether it's for policy, education, or research management. Next slide. So just to wrap up a bit, kind of talked a lot, give you a good quick primer about UX and UI, what they mean, and how they serve varied audiences within NOAA, some core design ideas, and some practical examples. But the the main point here is focusing on user-centered design. We can really build um, applications, software, you know, graphic designs that communicate our message more clearly in a more easy to understand manner. Um, we produce infographics that help move the reader from A to B. We create websites that feel more natural to use, ensuring the data is shared in a clear way and in the way that we meant it, is the people who put it out into the universe designed it to be. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, but I really want to thank you for your time and hopefully you bring some of these practices into the work that you're doing.
All right. I think, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to do questions more towards the end.
Yeah, you all can throw questions in the chat at any point, but we'll save some time at the end for questions for any of our speakers. So we'll now turn it over to Chelsea.
Great, thank you. So I'm Chelsea Thompson. I'm the communications lead for NOAA's Chemical Sciences Laboratory, and I sit over at the DSRC. So very briefly, for those who don't already know me, I was previously a research scientist here in the lab as an atmospheric chemist. So spent quite a few years doing the science and doing the research and writing scientific papers, and then moved into this communications role. And one of the things I do a lot now is creating scientific illustrations, I would say, information graphics to illustrate these scientific concepts that we're working on. And so that's sort of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be focusing on that, but taking it back to the foundations of graphic design. There's a lot of principles and concepts that you can incorporate into your graphics that will be important for when you're making your own graphics. So I'm just going to run through quite a few of those basic foundational principles here. Next slide. All right, so information graphics. What I'm talking about mostly are these two-dimensional static graphics, and this encompasses a range of scientific figures, illustrations, diagrams, schematics that combine graphical elements with information or data. And so on this continuum between a figurative illustration, which is basically a drawing or representative illustration, and then on the other side is abstract, where it's your standard data graph that we all make. The information graphics kind of sit right in the middle. And so the point of these graphics is that they should clarify, not simplify. And I'm not trying to step on anybody else that uses the word simplify. What I mean is that you want to make your very complex scientific message or concept clearer to the viewer. You don't want to sacrifice your scientific accuracy. So you can simplify your graphics, and that's what we'll talk about when we talk about simplifying your graphics. But don't simplify your science, because you would still want it to be accurate. So the graphics should engage the viewer and invite exploration of the information. So things that are overly abstract, even while accurate, and a lot of scientists are used to looking at very abstract data graphs, they're not approachable to the non-expert, and they actually risk turning off the viewer, and they don't want to explore your science further. And so information graphics really balance that scientific information and accuracy with the engaging approachability of visual design. So next. So this is just one example. The graph in the top is the original design for a graphic about expansion of the universe for Scientific American. And this was, I mean, it's accurate. It's basically showing the way these different elements of the universe have expanded over time, but it was deemed too abstract for their audience. And honestly, it's too abstract for me. I don't really know what that is just by looking at it. And then on the bottom is what their final design ended up being. And so as you can see, it's pretty much the exact same layout, but they've incorporated now visual elements that use recognizable space imagery. And so when you're just flipping through the magazine, you know, okay, this is a graphic about space. All right, next. All right, so information graphics can vary widely from the more visually simplistic to the very elaborate. And this will depend on your audience. So if you're talking to adults or kids, scientists, or the public, the placement, journal article, big poster, website, magazine, and then also the sizing. So you can have maybe just a single column in a journal article, 2-page magazine spread, a large format poster, and that's really going to dictate how complex and how elaborate your graphics can be. But no matter how complex they are, a basic understanding of graphic design fundamentals can level up your visuals. All right, so next. All right, so we're talking about visual relationships. There's basic principles called these Gestalt principles. And this is associated with a school of Gestalt psychology, which is actually focused on the idea that relationships between individual parts inform how we perceive the whole. And so there's these 8 principles that are these visual Gestalt principles. And some of them are more important for scientific graphics than others, so I'm not going to go through every single one of these. But like proximity, for example, all things else being equal, we tend to perceive things that are closer together as being part of a group or related to each other. So, and then similarity means all else being equal, we perceive objects that share a common visual attribute as belonging to the same group. So color, size, orientation. And then things that are symmetrical, we perceive as belonging to a same group. Things that are parallel, we perceive as belonging to a same group. And so you can see how you can start to use these sort of principles in your graphics to group items or show relationships between items by using these sort of common visual characteristics to show that relationship. All right, next. All right, and so when we're putting together a graphic, we also have to think about hierarchy. And for visual design, there's quite a few principles of hierarchy. And what it means is basically you are controlling the visual information into an arrangement or composition to imply importance to the viewer. And so what that does is that it influences the order in which the human eye perceives what it looks at, and tells the viewer what is the most important, what do they see first. And it basically controls the flow of your graphic, and that controls the flow of the narrative. So this is also really important for visual storytelling. And so I'll just run through a few of these. The most obvious, I guess, is hierarchy and size. So larger objects are perceived as being the most important. Hierarchy and color. So this can actually outweigh size. And that means that higher contrast objects, so if they're darker, brighter, bolder, will stand out visually even if they're smaller. So you can see that in the example there, where the smaller dot is actually what you perceive first, even though it is actually the smaller object, but because it's black. Next slide. So objects that appear closer are going to attract the attention of the viewer first and are going to be perceived as the most important. And so this can be achieved in multiple different ways. You have hierarchy in space, in depth, and in perspective. And so space can be created by using size, color, overlapping objects, blurring effects. And then, so those two labels are backwards. Hierarchy in depth is created by blurring size and color. Hierarchy in space is created by overlapping objects. And then hierarchy in perspective is by size, color, and movement. So you're basically looking at this flow. And then you can also use color choices to create this sense of depth. And so it depends on your background. So when you have a darker background, warmer colors will advance into the foreground of your graphic, and darker colors will go into the back. Whereas if you have a lighter background, the cooler colors appear closer and the lighter colors appear in the back. And then the bottom picture, what I'm referring to here is what we call atmospheric or aerial perspective. And what this means is that lighter desaturated colors can be used for distant objects to create depth. And so this is exactly what we see when we look out over the horizon. And this is just basically be created by air and aerosols and things like that in the atmosphere, that the further away an object is, the lighter and more diffuse the color is. All right, next. So then there's also a hierarchy principle of encoding information. And so there's another training on data visualization specifically. So I'm not going to go too much into data viz, except for this one slide. But there is a hierarchy called Cleveland and McGill's graphical features hierarchy. And this ranks the visual elements based on how accurately humans can perceive them and estimate them, and how accurately we can perceive differences in between them. So this, again, is very important for data viz. And the hierarchy means that what we can perceive differences in one dimension, like length, better than we can for 2 dimensions, which is area, or 3 dimensions, which is volume. And so every time you add a dimension, our perception, our ability to estimate what that size is less and less accurate, and our ability to see differences is less accurate. And then colors are by far the least accurate. So length is better than area, is better than volume, is better than color. So what this means, tips: never use a pie chart when a bar graph will do. And also check your creativity. So overly unique graphs will actually hinder the understanding of your viewer. So like bubble charts, for example, are very commonly misinterpreted, because a bubble chart is a circle. And so in theory, you should be comparing area, but humans are terrible at comparing area. And so people end up comparing the diameter, and you end up having a very inaccurate representation of your data when you do things like that. All right, next slide. All right, so color, I could do an entire presentation on color, but we don't have time. So just a brief overview of color terminology. The hue is the pure pigment color, like red, green, blue. Saturation is how intense or vivid a color appears. And then value is how light or dark a color appears. And you can best determine what the value is by looking at a color in grayscale. And then we talk about different variations of a hue, tint, tone, or shade. So tint is when you add white, make it lighter. Tone is when you add gray and make it more muted. And then shade is where you add black and make it darker. Next, please. So remember that colors can be deceiving. Our perception of a color or a color value changes based on its surroundings. So for example, in this image, all of those gray dots are actually the exact same value, but they look different to us because of their surroundings. And then next. And then also remember that we don't all see colors the same way. Even for those of us that are not colorblind, we don't perceive colors the exact same way. But then when you add color blindness and all these different variations that humans have as far as perceiving color, it's even more complex. So colors that differ in both hue and value will be the most universally acceptable, or accessible. So if you are using a line graph, for example, and you want to separate your data based on color, don't just change the hue and the value, for example. And the best way, so the rainbow color scale, for example, has fallen out of favor because its value is not consistent. So if you take the rainbow color scale and put it into grayscale, you can see what I mean by that. That even though the color may be different, the value is not a continuous gradient. And so it's actually widely misinterpreted and not very approachable for most people. And there's a website there, colorblindness.com, the COBLA's colorblindness simulator, where you can actually drag your graphics into it and see what your graphic will look like with different color blindness and also in grayscale. And so putting something in grayscale is one of the best ways to see if your colors have enough contrast so that they can be viewed. And then next.
And I'll add really quickly, there are some scientists who have created a colorblind safe rainbow scale. So I have a link to that at the very end of this presentation, along with other resources.
Oh, sorry, go back. I had a little box that popped up there. All right, so a tip here. Use more than one method to distinguish data sets. Because color is difficult for humans to distinguish and we don't all see it the same way, if you're making a line graph, for example, use different colors and a different line style or a different marker shape so that you can have redundant ways of separating your data sets. All right, next. Okay, so using color wisely. Color is a very powerful tool, but it should be used intentionally, not randomly. So use color to emphasize or highlight a data set or a point that you're trying to make, to show relationships or connections between objects, or to show distinction or separation between objects. So for example, in the bottom graphic there, everything is grayscale except for the items that the artist wanted to highlight, where red is being used to highlight things relating to lead cycling and yellow is used to highlight things related to cadmium cycling. And so that way you're creating a relationship between those things, but a separation between lead and cadmium. And you're highlighting the important aspects of the graphic. Important for scientists here, the Bering Sea marine heat waves graph. So what you could do, what a lot of scientists I've seen do, is choose a completely different color for every one of the data sets that they have on this graph. But that's not the main point that this scientist was trying to make. They're trying to point out the marine heat waves. So they chose one color for the marine heat waves and everything else became grayscale. And so this way you're simplifying the color scheme, but you're also very much simplifying the message. And on the bottom, the artist there is using, so this is a robot walking and showing the positions of legs as the robot moves. And they're using two different colors here. One is the left leg and one is the right leg. So you can clearly see and distinguish between those as you go through, and it simplifies the message. All right, next. So typography, also an entire science in and of itself and very nerdy. If you love geometry, I recommend it. I won't go too far into it. But important for us is two things: legibility, which refers to how easy it is to distinguish one letter from another. And this is dependent on the typeface, the font, the size, color, contrast, and letter spacing, which we call kerning. So I just have some examples there of things that look more legible and things that look less legible. So, you know, different font sizes, different fonts, different color and contrast can make it less legible. And then readability refers to how easy it is to read words, sentences, and paragraphs. And so now this is based on your typeface and size, but also basically just the paragraph structure, the leading between lines, if it's very much separated out or all crushed together, things that are really long, your eye has to track a much longer distance before it comes back to the beginning. Things that are too short now, your eye's like flipping back and forth and the words are broken up in strange ways. So just pay attention to your structure of your block of text as well. Next. And then as far as choosing a font, choose typefaces that are best suited for the purpose. So your headline, your subheader, body, text, caption. And you can combine things. You can combine a serif font and a sans serif font, for example. Things that are big, large display fonts, like this big headline here, is not appropriate for little small text. Next. And then we can talk about hierarchy and typography, which means that the font size you choose, the color, the weight can all be used to create this hierarchy and dictate the order that elements are read. So in this graphic, you can see you will read this first. That is the headline. And from there, and they're using color and weight and size. Next. And what this looks like in a science graphic is that the heading has a larger, bolder font. You have smaller font for the intro text. The subheadings are all the same font. It's all the same size. It's all the same weight. Your captions are smaller, but they're all consistent, the same size, the same weight. And your labels, again, are smaller, but it's all the same size and the same weight. Next. And then my favorite, to serif or not to serif. You will read all over the internet some people arguing that serif typefaces are more legible or readable for large bodies of text. However, and this is what you see in newspapers and magazines, however, the research does not actually support this claim. There's no real, they've tried to do research on this, and the research does not support that one is more legible necessarily than the other. So it's just traditional to use serifs. Use whatever you want and just make sure it's legible and readable. All right, next. All right, so a few things about composition. How you organize your graphic matters, basically. So the F pattern is common in Western cultures, so that means your eyes typically scan from top to bottom, left to right, because that's how we read a book. And norms for other cultures should be considered if your target audience is a different culture, and adjust that accordingly. So the bottom example is a poster for the CDC made for COVID. For Western audiences, the title, the main part of it, started at the top left. When they switched it for an Eastern audience, for an Arabic audience, they actually made that title in the top right. And then centering an object, so placing an object in the group, in the center of a group, emphasizes that object. And then you can further emphasize that with size, color, and other means. So in this example, the contraption in the middle, the instrument that they've built there, they have it large, centered, and a different color to show the emphasis of that object. All right, next. So balance refers to the distribution of visual weight equally through a composition, and it's more pleasing to the eye and it feels more stable. This can be achieved through symmetry, either bilateral, so the two halves are the same, radial symmetry, or even with asymmetry where the two halves are different, but the visual weight is balanced between the sides. Next. So alignment, this dictates that the visual elements are not placed arbitrarily throughout a composition. So alignment in graphics provides structure, order, logic, and it's clean and neat. And it reflects on the perception of care, neatness, and attention to detail of the research itself. So this is one of the things I say, which is sloppy graphics implies sloppy research. So make your graphics look clean and neat, if nothing else, and aligned, and it will reflect well on your research as well. So this is a large infographic from Science Magazine. And then on the right, you can see that it has actually been organized into boxes and grids. Next. And then arranging content into boxes or long vertical lines is the easiest way to create alignment and structure. So here's just two examples. One that I made years ago about the Aliso Canyon gas leak. Everything is in boxes. And then another graphic from an artist where you can basically just put everything along these vertical lines and it creates this nice alignment structure. All right, next. So negative space, or what's called white space, is a very good thing. It allows your graphic to breathe. It keeps it from feeling cluttered and overcrowded. And it can also be used to create separation between groups of elements instead of using an actual visual separator. And so that's the principle of proximity in play. So there, again, we have that big graphic from science, and they actually use this separator of negative space called a gutter to separate the two sides. Next. So movement and flow, also very important. So this is an effective way to attract viewers' attention, and also important for visual storytelling because it guides the viewer sequentially through your visual narrative from point A to point B to point C, etc. And the most common way to do this is through lines, arrows, and what we call leading lines, which is essentially arranging objects that are not necessarily lines in linear patterns to create the image, the visual perception of lines. And so in this graphic from Scientific American, they've used lines and arrows to talk about how cloud seeding works. And they actually go from left to right. They have this line of the airplane that comes in. You have arrows that go up into the cloud and creates the precipitation, and then it falls down as rain. And so by creating this visual flow, you're actually creating a narrative story for the reader. Next. All right, and then my last principle for you, annotations versus captions. So I highly recommend using annotations, labeling, and legends on your graphic instead of captions to the fullest extent possible. Journal articles do require a caption, but they do not require you to make a very long caption. So it should not be a treasure map for your viewer to decipher what the symbols mean, where I read papers like this where you're bouncing back and forth between the caption and the graphic over and over to try to figure out what the symbols mean. It's much easier on the viewer to annotate and label your graphic. And also remember that if you're making a graphic for a digital format like a PDF online, alt text is needed for these digital versions to have Section 508 compliance. And screen readers don't recognize embedded text. So then writing a good alt text description becomes more important. And so pro tip here, your graphic will inevitably get divorced from its caption anyway, if you start giving it a presentation or it winds up in Google Images. So make it understandable without your caption. And I just put a few examples here that I've done. The solar radiation modification methods graphic has shown up over and over and over again now in Wikipedia, in newspaper articles, in Google Images, and there's no caption. So for things like this, it's really important to have the most important information on your graphic so that it doesn't lose its information. All right, and next. So here's just a few recommended resources for further information. A lot of the stuff that I presented in here came from this book called Building Science Graphics. And Jen Christensen is the art director for Scientific American. So I highly recommend that. And then a few other links here for further information.
Awesome. Now we'll switch it over to Kathy, who will talk about more practical, really tips on how to get started and work through your idea from start to finish. You're muted, Kathy.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to get back to basics and how do you actually create a graphic from the get-go. And I come from a journalism background. I don't come from a science background. So I'm used to working with clients and having a lot of conversation back and forth. So my advice is based on that. What I need to start with is knowing what is the format going to be. Is it going to be big, small? Is it going to be color? Is it going to be black and white? Does it need to be both? Is there a shape? When do you need the graphic? who's on your team to review and revise. That'll have an influence on what the deadline is going to be and when you need to get it done. You need to know who your audience is. We said audience repeatedly throughout this conversation. And who your audience is going to influence what your style choices are when you create your graphic. Of course, you have to know what you're trying to get across, the concept, and whether there are any other expectations about the graphic at all. So I'm going to go through these points just very briefly. This is very basic, standard formats, JPEG, PNG, PDF, or other. You need to know if it's going to be published. What does the magazine require? Because sometimes they want a certain DPI, they want 72 or 300. If it's a paper, how much space can you afford? Do you have a page? Do you have a half a page? Are there typeface requirements? So you need to know all that stuff. And then you need to think about legibility, which Chelsea touched on as well. The smaller your graphic is going to be, the more simple probably your typography needs to be, and you need to consider the sizes. And you need to get someone to tell you how easy this is to read. So somebody from outside your group can be really helpful. So let's start with timing. How long is it going to take? If someone comes to me and says, okay, can you get that done by Friday? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. And it's going to depend on who's involved, who has the final say, how you're going to share it, and building in time for a guinea pig, because you want to include a viewer who has not been part of the process before you finalize it, because they might see something that you don't see. So let's talk about backing out the schedule. This is just an example. This may completely vary for what you're trying to do. So do you need 3 days to get your idea out there? Do you need three days for your feedback people to get back to you? And then you make your second iteration and it needs to be reviewed and back and forth and back and forth. So here is something, if we need all those dates that I showed in the first slide, you get assigned your graphic on January 1st. It needs to be due on January 29th to get all that review process in there. So you need to keep that in mind. How long do you really have to do this? And that's going to influence what you do. Also, who's the audience? Is it the general public? Is it your fellow scientists, the NSF? Is it a bunch of high school kids? All of the above. So I'm going to take an example from a project called Splash. The acronym is Splash. And that audience was an outdoor audience, hikers passing through a valley where you've set up some measuring devices and you want people to know what the equipment is, how it works, and why it's there. So you need something that's going to engage your audience, who could be pretty much anybody. And this is what it looks like. So what do? This is ultimately where you want to get. You want there to be trailside signs that anybody can read and understand. And what we did with this when we got this assignment was to use a sense of humor and to create these superheroes out of what the measuring devices were, because we wanted this to appeal to all ages. We wanted people to understand what was going on. So we hired a guy who was actually a cartoonist and was used to drawing superheroes and created these superheroes out of the equipment that was in the field. Another thing that happened with this is that they used the material that we created to create a story map online that uses this imagery and text on a completely different platform. So it exists in the ether on their website for their project, Splash project. But it also exists in the field. So when you get these slides, you can click on Outreach in the Splash site and see what they did with it. Okay, another audience might be a little more interested in, say, how a research flight unfolds. and they'll be willing to take some time to look through this image. And so you have a little bit more complexity that you can include creating this, but you also still want to make it clear to people what's going on. So the basic concept of this was there's two research flights. We wanted to show the flight pattern and keep the focus on that. So we used a red line and a blue line to show the different patterns of flight. This one was particularly interesting to me where they would spiral down. And then we also use numbers to help people get through the graphic because it's a little hard to follow the sequence if you don't know where to start and where to end up. So using numbers can be a useful thing to get people to work their way through your graphic. Once you have your message, the thing you want to get across, this is about process. So I highly recommend drawing, scribbling, just trying to figure out in your head what is this visually. If you have an example from a client, for them to show you something that they would like, that's very helpful. You can also take the concept and, like we all do, Google around, see what comes up, use that for inspiration, talk it over with your colleagues. And I think that what you want to wind up with to get started anyway is at least 3 different kinds of ideas so you can pick out the pros and cons of each of those. Usually your first idea is not your best idea, so it's important to work through things. There's a lot of tools you can use. Some are free or free-ish, and then there are subscriptions that you can sign up for. I have these all linked in the slides again. Pencils and paper, scribbling, great idea. Canva is something people are using more and more, which is a kind of a cut and paste approach. Of course, PowerPoint, you can do that. Google Slides, Adobe Express, you can do things that are free. Pixabay, Unsplash, Wikimedia Commons are sites where you can get copyright-free images by scrolling through. And in the next slide, I give you a list of public domain image sites, which are mostly .govs. Subscription sites, CU offers, if you're in CIRES, you can get Adobe Creative Cloud that gives you Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and you can also get through CU training through LinkedIn Learning. If you don't know how to use those programs, or if you want to get an update, or you want to learn the basics, you can subscribe to stock image sites like Shutterstock, and of course there are different payment parameters for that, so you have to check that. CIRES Comms has access to the Noun Project, which is an icon site, and we're happy to do research for you and share icons from there. And then there's AI, and I've used AI applications in Adobe, and I'll show you a couple things with that. I don't think we're going to have time for a demo, but I'll show you what I came up with. So in the slides, you'll find these public domain image libraries, USDA, USFS, NOAA has one. There's a really great one through the California Department of Water Resources that I linked that gives you a lot of stuff about fire, drought, weather, and is worth looking at to get imagery. Copyrights. You're responsible for knowing if something is copyright protected. And as a journalist, I've had colleagues who haven't been very circumspect about that. And we've occasionally gotten bills for using materials, copyrighted materials that people just picked up off the internet. So it's really important to know what the copyright situation is with anything you use. If it's a public domain image, you can use it. If you don't know, check, ask, but be sure you know that before you use an image. So now I'm going to run through quickly some of the examples the CIRES Comms department has gotten from people who've asked us to do things for them. And they vary a lot. This is an example of a scientist wanting to combine two images into a single graphic. We had some time to work on this. He wanted this 3D-ish satellite to be floating over the river surface in the graphic on the right. So there's a 3D graphic on the left, the 2D-ish graphic on the right. And the easy way to do this, easy, you still have to work on it if you don't have much time, is just to get some sort of image of a satellite, cut and paste it, rework your graphic a little bit, and you can get that done in a reasonable amount of time. But that's not what he wanted. That wasn't very interesting. So we took it and took the two graphics, the so-called TD1, and ran it through a 3D filter, made adjustments there to make it reflect the information that was in the original graphic, and then cut out essentially the satellite to get it to be floating across the top of the water surface in the original graphic. Okay, a lot of the things we get, and we talked about abstraction a little bit, but what if the idea itself is really abstract? What do you do? Well, one of the things I do is like, I got to get my head wrapped around this. So I start scribbling away and drawing and what if this and what if that. So I'm going to pull out an example from Twyla Moon, who she and I were talking about a concept about this thing for Q Greenland. And we talked about it, and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on with this. So I gave her just one idea. I was like, this is what I think you're telling me. And this this graphic is like, what is this all about? So we talked some more after that, and very helpful. Instead of me scribbling, Twyla scribbled, sent me a drawing of what this is what I mean. So she was showing me as a visual artist what it was that she wanted to have happen with this graphic. So it's like, oh, okay, I get it. I get it. It's a very abstract concept. It's relationships between different groups. So I started saying, okay, well, what if the relationship is a bunch of pointers? What if it's a bunch of things that overlap? Some are related to the other thing, some are related to some things and not the others. So I gave her these 4 things. And then we talked some more. And she told me what was working, what wasn't working from her point of view. In this one, I incorporated some imagery from Greenland or the Arctic Circle. Others were just strictly shapes and colors and some text. And this is where we wound up. So you can see in this where it's really helpful if you ask somebody or you ask yourself, draw me a picture of this. What does it look like to you if it's a graphic? Another example. Okay, a client. Thanks, Twyla. Another example that got sent to me was this graphic where the client wanted to show the things that are in the caption. Really helpful to have a caption and to have this diagram to kind of start with. But this is not the most compelling way to show this information. So the first thing I did with this one was to recreate it using some of the tools that Chelsea mentioned in her talk about principles of graphic design. I'm using different colors, I'm using arrangement, I'm using iconography to show you this is about fire. But really, this graphic is about the relationship among these things. So how is your eye moving through this graphic? To me, I have to work really hard to figure out, well, why are these things in this position and that position and so on and so forth. So we talked, we went back and forth. And one of the things we did was to break down the message into the components. Wildfire risk has 3 components. The risk is at the intersection of the components and emerges from the interaction of these components. And each of the components has elements from social, technological, and ecological systems. So it's an abstract idea, but we've kind of boiled it down into these things that we want to show. So ultimately, this is what happened with this graphic, where we've used colors that blend to show that there's an overlap between social systems and technological systems. We've used a hierarchy to move the development of fire risk, to increase it by stacking these things and then showing the way that these things interact. So we got to a relationship here. It's an abstract idea. We've used visuals to kind of show you what's going on a little bit more clearly, we hope. Okay, sometimes when people share a caption with you, it's a little extensive. And Chelsea again touched on this when she was talking about if you can detach your caption from your graphic, that's kind of a good thing. I had a really hard time figuring out what was going on with this, so a lot of conversation happened, and I sent some ideas, which are probably just as confusing, if not more confusing than the caption. So I sent this to my client. I sent this, trying to show these relationships. So we talked and talked to get what is the essence of the thing we want to show here. And in this case, the idea boiled down to, as individuals and organizations grow and become more complex, they become less responsive to change. And then there's another idea going on that if you're working intergenerationally with these principles of neon care, which is what this was the context for this graphic, it can strengthen abilities to change. So eventually we got to this, which is pretty darn different from this and this. But that's what came out of refining the idea and clarifying the idea. Responsiveness to change was becoming lower and lower, so we have that triangle shape. And then organizational complexity was increasing, so the triangle shape is flipped over. And meanwhile, intergenerational exchange is increasing and influencing more change. So that's where we wound up with this. It does simplify, but we hope it clarifies at least one aspect of what they were trying to get across in that multi-page caption. Okay. We don't really have time to do an AI demo, but I just want to show you that in Adobe Express, you can just go in that program. It's free, and you can pick their little AI generator, and you can give it a prompt. And my prompt was desert landscape with isolated thunderstorms in the distance. And you hit the button, and the little wheel spins around, and it comes up with these 3 images. I would encourage you to experiment with AI if this is something that would be useful to you, always keeping in mind that the image that comes up is probably going to need some editing on your part. If you want to have an AI demo, give me a call. I'd be happy to show you. It's a really hilarious thing to work with. This is the link to Adobe Express and pick a prompt. This is a great prompt. An elephant herd drinks at a watering hole in Kenya while lions watch from a distance. Try it and see what happens. Okay, one more thing, save everything. You might use it later, especially icons if you're picking up icons. And these are very simple, but they have multiple uses. And if you save your graphics in an editable state, you may wind up using them in the future. Save yourself a lot of work. So that's another thing I would encourage. Finally, I mentioned before that you need probably somebody who's not involved in your process to look at what you've come up with. And so if you Google graphic design fails, you'll wind up with things like this. For example, This is a poster from Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement. And I think your graphic design message is not particularly what you wanted to get across. The TSA checkpoint, I will leave with you without comment. And finally, who doesn't want a big drink of fart water? So, with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Lauren. And yeah, there we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. So I hope for all of you who have stayed with us to the end, thanks so much for staying. I know this was a lot of information we're throwing at you. There's just two more things I want to get to. One is an activity, and then we're going to have a link to a survey for you all to fill out on how useful this training was. So if you guys are interested, what I've done here is just thrown up a couple examples of infographics and science graphics that I have pulled out. And I offer you all the chance to review and give any comments on these. And I am providing these all to you with no context. I'm not telling you anything about where they are, what they're from. I just want you can either throw messages in the chat or come off of mute and say them out loud. Tell me what you think about it, what works, what doesn't. Do you see any of these principles applying that Chelsea talked about, the visual principles? Do you see ways to improve them? Feel free to throw any thoughts up there. And here's our first one. Yeah, Christine, not enough white space. Yeah. Hard to read, smaller fonts. Yep, fonts are really small. I'll just go to the next one, but I'm gonna share all these with you guys so you can look at them afterwards. Yeah, the flow is not really clear. It looks very busy. Absolutely. Here's another one. Nice alignment. Yeah. You can see that it has a very clear structure and things are in boxes and aligned well. Using the gutter. Yep, using that principle of you having negative space or a gutter. Yeah, maybe a little unclear with how big the raindrops are as compared to the planet sizes. Yeah, let's see. The one, yeah, the column on the right seems confusing. I don't want to go through all of these because we are running out of time, but there is one more I just want to show you guys. This one that I'm calling the tornado. Yep, yep. Not color safe colors. Yeah, I found this online. I have no idea. I cannot even begin to understand what this graphic is trying to communicate. So, yep. Yep, my brain is also inside a tornado with this one. So, we'll send you guys these slides. Feel free to look at these examples, on your own time and just, think about how those visual principles apply or don't apply or how you might make this better or worse. And oh, here's another great one from NASA. I have some resources here, and again, we'll send you these slides. So no, I'm not going to go through them, but there's lots of resources and inspiration out there for you guys further reading. The CIRES comms team and all the speakers here today, we're always available to you guys to brainstorm, bounce ideas, get feedback. Please reach out to us at any time. We're always helpful here for you. And lastly, if you have a moment, please just take a photo of this or scan this QR code, take a brief survey about how how useful this training was to you. We really want to know so we can, tailor our future trainings to be more useful. Thank you all for sticking with us to the end. I know this was a lot and it was long, but thank you. Again, reach out to us anytime you have questions. Oh no. Kara, are you getting? Oh no, you guys are getting there. Oh no, problem with the QR code. Okay, well, I will email you all a link then to the survey. Sorry about that. I'll email you all a link instead. So, oops, there we go. Anyway, thank you. I know that we kind of went over time, but if you have any questions, feel free to stay on. I'll stay on for a few minutes. If any of the other speakers can, that will be great. If not, if you have to go, go. Again, feel free to email us with questions or drop by our office. Chelsea and Dimitri sit at DSRC in the NOAA building. I am at DSRC and on CU campus in the CIRES office. Kathy's on the CIRES office on campus. So feel free to come and talk to us whenever you have time.